Is Spider-Man 3 really as bad as people say? I mean, I remember enjoying it quite a bit as a kid. I was pretty excited to go see it since it was one of the first PG-13 films I was allowed to see in theaters. I was pumped. I had a good time. I feel like the other people in the theater did. But hey, maybe my memories are incorrect. Maybe I've got amnesia and I'm tricking myself. So it's finally time for me to go back and watch this film for the first time in many, many years and see how it holds up. Let's do it. Much like Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3 has a more serious tone than the first film. In fact, it's gone a bit further in that serious direction. See, where the first movie had its overall campiness and the second one had some really funny jokes, this one doesn't. Well, at least not nearly as much, or those jokes take on a very different tone. Really, aside from a couple good Jonah Jameson scenes and some things I'm saving for later, I didn't find that much to laugh at here. However, maybe that isn't so bad. After all, just like how Spider-Man 2 earned its more serious tone, maybe this one can as well. Actually, the overall focus of this movie seems to lend itself to that, considering that we're going back and touching on the most serious part of the first film, Uncle Ben's death. See, at its core, this movie is about Peter losing grip on what it means to be a hero, especially after he learns that another man was Uncle Ben's killer and that he's still out and about. From here, Peter's desire for revenge and his feelings of hatred guide his actions until it's hard to tell if he's going to be a hero again at all. On top of that, since the killer has now gotten powers of his own and become the Sandman, Spider-Man has another big superpowered foe to go up against. All these ideas, they work to me to some degree or another. By humanizing the Sandman via his relationship with his daughter and showing Peter's rage and shock at learning he got the wrong guy in the first film, it absolutely sold me on the core of this dynamic. I believe that Sandman wasn't a through and through evil person, but that Peter might no longer care about the right and wrong thing to do. Because of his love for his uncle, because of his longing to have him back, he would end up disregarding his words and his responsibility. It's a deeply sad, almost tragic arc for this character, especially since the first chunk of the film focuses on how great Peter's life has gotten. But once he feels everything is coming together for him, once he's managed to succeed as both Peter and Spider-Man, that's when his pride and personal feelings will come to destroy his heroic self. And that pride is also built up in believable ways as he slowly disregards MJ's feelings and becomes too self-absorbed to recognize her pain and anguish. When she tries to speak to him about her struggles, he interrupts her, assuring her that he knows how she feels even though he hasn't really listened to a word she's had to say. Beyond that, I think MJ's overall characterization here is a big improvement over the last movies. There, I honestly just didn't buy a lot of her lines and found much of the acting to be stilted, along with the whole thing of her abandoning her fiancé at the altar. But here, I was able to grasp her feelings, believe them, and understand why she's having such a hard time. All in all, their relationship in this one felt a lot more real to me than it did in the last film. And that's a good thing, since it's one of the most important ways we see the side effects of Peter's pride consuming him. But my favorite scene in regards to this has gotta be Peter's talk with Aunt May after he believes he's killed the Sandman. He sits down with her, all excited to talk about his success, and tells her that Spider-Man killed him. We got the bad guy. His reaction as Aunt May seems only disturbed and confused by this, as she says that Spider-Man doesn't kill. It showed a very believable gulf forming between them as Peter was consumed by hatred and anger and losing himself. Where previously Peter's main villain were these external forces, now the main villain felt like Peter's feelings themselves, and whether or not Spider-Man would become a monster like the Green Goblin, who only exists for self-serving purposes. So yeah, this doesn't seem so bad. This is actually pretty great. I'm having a good time. There's some good characters, themes, ideas to read into here. What's the issue? Well, the issue is pretty simple, really. I've maybe only talked about a third of the movie, and I've been speaking in pretty vague terms. Because unlike the previous films, which had a pretty tight focus on a core conflict, this one spreads itself far too thin. Along with the Sandman, it juggles Harry's desire for revenge against Spider-Man, the alien symbiote, Eddie Brock, and eventually Venom. Now, a movie with a lot of different moving parts and ideas thrown into the mix can work. I mean, this movie is over 2 hours long, so I guess I can see a world where this would be fine. But this isn't that world. Villains in this movie move in and out of the picture at seemingly random intervals, only popping back up when it's convenient for the plot, and having little in the way of a consistent plan or motivation. Like Harry's amnesia suddenly taking him out of the story so there's time for Sandman and the symbiote, only for his memories to suddenly resurface once the Sandman's out of the picture. Because of this, even though there's a lot going on, the film doesn't really have a sense of forward momentum and comes across as chaotic and cluttered. However, I think the movie definitely could have handled both Harry and Sandman at the same time, though. There's actually a good way of thematically tying them together, where Peter's feelings toward the Sandman are based on revenge, and Harry's towards Peter are built on a similar thing, but they're both kind of misunderstanding the situation and how these things came about. For me, the real problem is the symbiote and the way it relates to Eddie Brock. Now, I know a lot of people have issues with Eddie not being what they expected him to be, not being like the comic book character they know and love, and that's totally fair if that's the case for you. Fortunately for me, though, I'm not all that familiar with his comic counterpart. In fact, I think the only version of this character I've seen is from the Spectacular Spider-Man. All this is to say that I'm not really married to a particular version of Eddie Brock. He can be whoever, really, and beyond that, I'm generally fine with changing characters around a bit if it fits the story better. Unfortunately, though, even without caring about Eddie Brock much, this movie is, it does a terrible job with him. He absolutely feels tacked on, and I think it would have been far better without him. Even removing him without adding in new scenes for Sandman and Harry would have been an improvement. Just make this movie shorter, please. Just let me out. He brings the pace to a sluggish crawl at certain points, and as the final embodiment of dangerous revenge running rampant, he feels pathetic and silly rather than like a genuine threat. I mean, his lines in their big final battle toward the end of the movie are just like,
"Ooh, my spider sense is tingling." If you know what I'm talking about.
We can find a way to settle this.
You're so right. I'm thinking humiliation. Kind of like how you humiliated me. Do you remember what you did to me? You made me lose my girl. Now I'm gonna make you lose yours. How's that sound, Tiger?
While I can enjoy silliness, I mean, I did with the first movie, this stuff doesn't land for me. Because as far as I'm concerned, Venom is something we're meant to take seriously. What I mean is that right now, Spider-Man would be terrified that MJ is going to die. So this goofy guy feels totally out of place. Unfortunately, the material and the actor, it doesn't have that same thing Green Goblin had, where Willem Dafoe was able to play both sides of the character exceptionally well and make him feel more grounded than I expected. Then there's the manner in which Venom is introduced, which feels incredibly random and contrived, like he happens to be in the church where Peter happens to be ringing a bell that I guess he happens to know will help get the symbiote off him. It's incredibly convenient. And while I'm fine with a certain level of contrivance being used to speed up the plot or make situations more interesting, this doesn't work for me because I don't care about Eddie's inclusion in the first place. As such, all I can see are the negatives of this moment. All of this being the case, I have to ask a simple question. What does the symbiote add to this movie? Seriously, why is it here? Couldn't Peter have had his anger toward the Sandman without it being involved? I would have still believed he might go out and try to kill him. Really, the only thing the symbiote does here is serve as an external representation of Peter's internal threat, which could be cool, especially for a big old superhero movie with fun fights and all that jazz. But Harry could have represented that all anyway, so it doesn't really work. In my mind, the only thing it adds is a certain level of extremity. What I mean is that Peter's descent into evil can be a bit more extreme because it's being amplified by this monster. As such, I'm more likely to buy other bad things he does and to buy that his descent could happen relatively quickly, which means I'm more readily able to believe that he would end up doing this emo dance on the street and going to harass MJ at work. But then there's another question from this. What do those scenes add to the movie? Well, they're pretty funny. I, for one, am a big emo Peter Parker truther. I like how much of a jerk he is with Harry and his wild dance montage. It has a certain tilt of dark humor to it that I really like. Peter is so far gone now that he'll literally dance in the street because he's so happy he's blown up his friend. So yeah, he's certainly fallen far, and this scene serves to show that, just in a bit of a oddball way, which I'm, again, not opposed to. The scene I can't so readily defend is the jazz club. This is where I have to stop being an emo Peter Parker truther. Oh boy. First off, it goes on for so long. I forgot this was in the film because people always talk about like the shorter dance thing. What about this one? It just keeps going. Beyond that, I don't really know what's going on here. So far, the emotional core of this movie, and really the prior ones too, has been treated pretty seriously, But now this incredibly theatrical dance is going on, and it feels really out of place for where we're at in these characters' journeys. Now, if this movie spent more of its time being goofy, I would be totally down for this scene still, or at least a shortened version of it. But as I've already established, this movie isn't as campy or silly, at least it didn't come across that way to me. In fact, this is a massive outlier, and it comes right before Peter strikes MJ and realizes that he needs to get rid of the suit. In other words, this elongated jazz club dance is a massive part of Peter's journey as a character, and to me, it trivializes his feelings and makes it way harder to take him seriously. And that's a problem. From here, the film just keeps getting more contrived and awful. I mean, next up there's that church scene I already complained about, but then we've got one that's particularly hysterical. Harry's butler telling him that Norman's glider killed him, not Spider-Man. Which, like, that's good information to have, Butler Man, but would have been nice to know that before Harry got half his face blown off. Seriously, just why would he withhold this information for so long? Maybe it was out of a worry that Harry wouldn't believe him, or maybe he thought it would sully Norman's name, but that's just me making up reasons. The film itself doesn't provide any compelling characterization for the butler to offset how incredibly contrived it is that he only decides to tell him now, right when it's convenient for the film and Peter needs his help. Afterward, we get the lame Venom fight, which I don't like Venom, so I don't really care about this. And then finally, Peter and the Sandman have a talk. Here, the Sandman reveals that it was something of an accident that he shot and killed Uncle Ben, and that he just needed money to help his sick daughter. In and of itself, this is a pretty powerful encounter, where Peter is able to recognize that he too has done terrible things, and finds it within himself to forgive the Sandman. Now, if the Sandman had been a focus in this movie, this would have worked a lot better for me. But honestly, by this point, I feel like he's basically been sidelined by the other conflicts, like this stuff with Venom, for example. So what could have been a meaningful capstone to their conflict instead becomes kind of meh. I just didn't really care much by this point. The film had thoroughly lost me and had failed to tap into the potential of this dynamic. By now, my conclusion about this movie is probably pretty obvious. I don't like it. I think it's very bad. It's a massive downgrade from the previous two films, in which I had an actual, I had a surprisingly great time with them. They were better than I remembered them being. But this one, it was far worse. I was really disappointed with it. I know some people like it in a sort of funny, ironic way. For the most part, I didn't. I didn't find it funny. If I did, this would have been a far different review, and I probably would have been praising it a lot and talking about how it works well as a comedy, but maybe not as a follow-up to the second film. I was really surprised at how few laughs I got and how few moments I had where I was able to go like, oh yeah, that was silly and fun. Really, as far as that stuff's concerned, there's just the emo Peter Parker dance. I didn't even find the jazz club scene funny because it just kept going on and I needed it to stop. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have any hot takes here. I think that Spider-Man 3 is a pretty bad movie, and I didn't enjoy it much at all. With that, I guess we've made our way through the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. But wait, there's more, because I still got the amazing Spider-Man movies to go through. That's right, I'm on this train. I'm not getting off. So if you enjoyed these videos, I hope you'll come back for those as well. Either way, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.